or you can always email me later if you have any questions or issues with the recording. And then really the announcement is that we have a couple openings on our board still. If anybody wants to join us, we would love to have you, or if you're interested in just being like a little bit involved, there's always committees that you could join too. So we would love to have any help that you can give. You can email here. I'm going to put our other one on here too. ReadingCAMFT.org. That's us. So those two, can everybody see that in the chat? If you open the chat, those are the email addresses. And then the last thing is, in order to get your CEU for tonight, I'm going to put, oh, where'd it go? Aha. I'm going to put our evaluation form right here. There's a link that you click, fill it out and submit it, and then we'll be emailing you your certificate within the week. So if you don't see the certificate for any reason, you can email either one of those and ask, but we should be getting it to you within the week. Okay, I'm trying, Danny, did I miss anything?
I have to unmute myself. No, I think that's it. Except, are you going to talk about how we're doing the format a little bit different?
Yes. So we're just gonna, we really want to make sure that Debbie has enough time to share all of her brilliant resources with us. So I'm gonna have Allie introduce her really quickly, and we're gonna let Debbie take the floor, and then we'll leave 15 minutes at the end for questions. And then also, if you guys want to do a meet and greet, if you have things that you'd like to share with each other, or, you know, I know that we miss seeing everybody in person, and then we wish we were in person. So we'll leave some time at the end for everybody. If there's things, if you have questions for our board, if you have announcements, we'll save that time for the end. So I think we're ready to pass it over. Allie, if you'd like to introduce our speaker, you can take the floor.
I always click on the wrong button to remute. I go to click anyways, so I apologize. I am so honored and thrilled to be introducing Debi. I was, in reaching out to her, I saw that she had presented on other topics for CAMFT, and this topic just felt so important to our community right now, and just yeah, just our profession. And so I reached out, and I was just thrilled by her grace and her willingness to jump on board and share with our chapter. I really appreciated both her wisdom as also serving in other chapters on how to put this together, and I just appreciated her graciousness in communicating with me. So thank you, Debi, for that, and thank you for your time tonight. Debi is an expert in the field of grief. She's been working with clients suffering from a lifetime of loss for over 25 years. She and her husband are the co-founders of, I'm gonna butcher the pronunciation, so jump in here, the Calabasas Counseling and Grief Recovery Center. I'm seeing your chuckle, so please. And she's also the founder of private practice grief workshops and trainings for mental health professions. And talking with her, you can hear her passion for the importance of this topic. So she's also an adjunct professor at the Graduate School of Education and Psychology at Pepperdine University, which my alma mater beat in basketball. Just gonna throw that one out there, only because Sarah Parker is here and you can join me in Gonzaga fans. But thank you so much. So without further ado, I really want to hand it over, and I am so excited and thrilled at what you're bringing to our community. So thank you so much, Debi.
Awesome, thank you. Actually, I chuckled because on my business card, you know, I had somebody who contacted me. I don't know how long my business cards had been out there, that I had been spreading them out all over the place, and somebody called me and said, I just want to let you know that there's a typo, and it says that there's like too many asses in Calabasas. And so it was like, great. So that's why I was stuck on. Yeah. So hi. So you know what? I am going to start with.
Sorry, Debi. Hold on. I'm doing it right now. There we go.
Okay. See, got it. All right. There you go. I found this picture last year and it was like, oh, that's just so feels like 2020 and maybe starting to be 2021 too, of how surreal that grief is and its impact on our clients and the uniqueness of I don't want to use the word unprecedented. It's been used way too many times. But the unique challenge of that we are grieving our own losses. Now we may have similar losses, but everybody grieves in different ways and for different reasons. So that's me. I've been doing grief for a long time. And I love doing this work. Because I get to see people, we get to see them get their feet back on the ground again, and be able to kind of figure out who they are in all of this, in whatever losses that they have, that they present us with. And so, yeah, so I love doing this work. So here's my goals. And move my little screen over here. Is to just give you some information about grief, mourning, loss, trauma. You know, we usually get that hour lecture on Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, maybe in school. And I want to be able to give you more information than that, and to empower you to be able to care for yourselves as well as support your clients. And I'm also going to say that, especially because we have a small crowd, which is really wonderful. So if you have any questions or comments, just somebody let, Allison, I can see you. Just let, just kind of give me a hand up if there's any questions, and I am perfectly fine doing questions along the way as well. Okay.
Just jumping in, Debbie, can the chat is also a place to put some questions, and Shauna and I can kind of facilitate the questions as they come up at the end. So, because I hear you saying like I can't see people because of face,
yeah,
but
yeah,
we can help monitor the questions through the site, through the chat, if you want to do that at the end, or I'm hearing you say you want to do it throughout.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So my agenda today is understanding loss. I'm also going to talk about hidden grief, which really contributes to a lot of the distress and isolation, and then recognizing the symptoms of grief and trauma, because I really think that trauma is knotted with grief, right? And then the importance of using psychoeducation in the area of loss and grief. Okay. So we know grief is a really normal and natural response to loss. And it's actually just in the last couple of years that I realized that the Anglo-French word of breath means injustice or heaviness. And I really think injustice, the unfairness of whatever significant loss that that our clients are going through or what we're going through almost always feels unfair. It is absolutely multifaceted response to loss. Grief is also the internal meaning that we give the experience of loss. And so kind of grief is on the inside. And hidden grief are those types of grief that aren't recognized as grieving experiences. And those types of losses that are not recognized as being, quote, valid to grieve. So I wanted to do a few definitions for you about different types of grief. There's been anticipatory grief. And anticipatory grief, we usually, it's that feeling of grief that occurs with an impending loss. And the impending loss usually is about the death of someone close due to an illness, the impending death. And it can be experienced by the person who is dying themselves. It is also, and I think we've really seen this a lot in the last year with the pandemic, is this, loss that is going to happen in the future, but is grieving losses now in the present while also grieving losses from the past, and all of what, isn't going to be in the future. Now, what makes anticipatory grief different than the grief after the loss is the imagining the loss ahead of time. People have been referring to the ups and downs of Corona coaster. Okay? And anticipatory grief is the attempt to adapt to the consequences of the loss ahead of time. Okay? And there's often not, there's no definitive time frame beforehand. And so if you think of, this whole last year, which started, I've got a notice on the top. I just let somebody in.
Thank you. I just realized I somehow made you the only host. Sorry.
Give it that. That's okay. And so what the anticipatory grief, that adapting to loss beforehand, by the way, grievers will sometimes talk about feeling really guilty that they're already planning for what's going to happen after their loved one dies, and then feeling really guilty about it. And to be able to help educate them of that's actually a really normal function of our brain. It's that we know it's that left side of our brain that is on survival mode. But sometimes grievers will tell you that they feel really guilty that that they're betraying their loved one because they're already trying to figure out what's going to happen when they're gone. Disenfranchised grief, which is actually a term that was first coined by Dr. Kenneth Doka, who is out in New Rochelle, New York, is any grief that goes unacknowledged or that can't be publicly mourned, or it's invalidated and unheard. It is often misunderstood or minimized, which makes it far more difficult to be able to work through. And the grief is isolating anyway, and then it becomes even more isolating due to the lack of support in the community. So I'll give you some examples of that, this disenfranchised, and then there's also invisible loss. Sometimes it's referred to as disenfranchised grief, okay, or disenfranchised loss, which is suicide loss, drug overdose, homicide loss. Though there's so much shame that is often attached to those types of losses that makes it so difficult for grievers to talk about. And by the way, the suicide loss, we have a hard time with that as clinicians when and if you have a client that dies by suicide, and how isolating, how shaming that can be. And there is the Association for Suicidology, American Association for Suicidology. They have a really wonderful clinicians support for clinicians who have gone through this. And so drug overdose, homicide law, historical unresolved grief and trauma. We saw this so often. That was the highlight of what Black Lives Matter protests is about. Is let's recognize all the loss and the deaths and the abuse, the losses of safety and trust, or losses in the LGBTQ community. I had actually Some of you are taking a training for me up in San Francisco, just a little east of San Francisco. His husband died a couple years ago. I had the hardest time finding a group for him for gay widowers. And you'd think that in San Francisco, I'd be able to find a group for him. We had a really, really hard time. Another example of invisible losses are infertility, miscarriage, pregnancy loss. Can be also, grief that people judge as it's gone on too long. And too long is never clearly defined. Okay? I also put in the example of getting clean and the loss of the drug. And people go, oh, well, but they're clean. They should be so grateful. It's like, yes, and it's a loss of a familiar pattern of behavior. It's a loss of a substance that they relied on for so long. Okay. So mourning, kind of grief is on the inside and mourning is on the outside. And, it's how we express our grief externally. Another way is grief gone public. Okay. And there's no one right or only way to mourn. And mourning often can involve religious beliefs or rituals, and is definitely affected by the customs and ethnic background and what we've been brought up. And that is what has been one of the things that has been so incredibly difficult over the last year. Okay, of those rituals and ceremonies that are created to gather family and friends and community together to reduce the isolation, we haven't been able to participate in. And that there's been so many of the restrictions really, really severely impact this. Yeah. I'm also going to say, do I have that? Okay. I'll go back to one of the definitions I really like about, you know what, actually, it's okay. I just remembered, I've got that in a slide up here. So here, let's talk about there's so many factors that affect grieving. Our age, grief for a 4-year-old is going to be very different than an 8-year-old. When I have families where there was a dad had killed himself, and mom had requested help of how do I deal with my kids and what do I say, and the 4-year-old, she had to have a very different conversation, obviously, with the 4-year-old than with the 8-year-old. Okay, there is also a developmental component of grieving. And I was just asked this the other day of, somebody who said, well, my 12-year-old, the 12-year-old client seems to be doing okay. So they don't seem to be grieving. It's like, they grieve differently, and they grieve kind of in spurts, and developmentally, it will have different meanings at different times in their lives as they get older. I know when my mom died when I was 32 and she was 60. And I remember people saying, oh, your mom was so young. I was like, she was 60. And then I have to say, when I turned 60, I was like, damn, she was so young. It had a really different meaning. Okay. So gender, sexual orientation, okay, how about ethnicity and culture? These are so many different factors, personality, some of the ways that we react to stress and emotion will be often how somebody grieves as well. A big factor is also the relationship with the person who has died. What was the quality of the relationship? And sometimes we think, somebody grieving the death of somebody that we would refer to as a less than loved one, that grief can actually be a little bit more confusing. I think it's kind of a sneaky grief, because people go, oh, well, you know, but you should be so grateful. I'm so grateful that that son of a bitch is gone. It's like, there certainly is also a whole bunch of things that they wish could have been different in that relationship. I'll talk about that more later. Circumstances of the death. Often when the circumstances are perceived as being preventable, that also will add to the grievers, the way that the person grieves. It will also create more complicated grief. And I'll explain complicated grief in a few minutes. Another factor is earlier experiences of loss or death, or earlier experiences, or that this is the first death that they've experienced and they haven't had any particular significant losses, death only being one type of loss. But loss is cumulative, and often this cumulative is negative. And so it's not unusual for somebody to come in with a present loss that has unearthed grief from a relationship that had ended a long time beforehand. Family circumstances, and I have to move my little thing here, and the amount of support that people have. Oh, this is actually the slide I was looking for before. Is the definition of what is a loss. And so I like to, stick with really simple definition. It's a change or an end in a relationship. And if we look at that, if we think about it, is that every relationship that we've ever had at some point is going to change or end. And often, sometimes we have a whole lot of conflicted feelings and thoughts about it. And it's difficult for some of those relationships for us to be able to feel more at peace in the way that those changes and the end of the relationship was handled. I also like to include that loss is a change or an end in a familiar pattern of behavior, so that when somebody stops using, the loss, the grief can be reaching out for this substance, only to realize when I need it another time, it's not there. I'm choosing not to. Okay. Oops. Oh. Sorry, sometimes my slides get ahead of me. So here's different types of losses. And actually, I had done a whole series of seminars for the American Federation of Government Employees last summer. And as I was going through creating their slideshow, I actually had great feedback from them. I had a whole bunch of losses all on one slide, and the feedback that I basically got was, you have way too many words. So they're like, can't you separate it into different types of losses? Like, okay. So loss of family, but this isn't only related to the death of a family member, right? It can be the loss of a parent who has been in healthcare for the last, months at a time, who is making sure that he or she isn't going to infect their family. Right? Maybe a loss of a child to addiction. Maybe loss of a good friend or a parent or a sibling to addiction. Okay? There's loss of a spouse, partner, loss of a sibling. I will say sibling loss, and there's so many different types of isolation that goes with losses. Sibling loss is one of the workshops I do is called the loss, kind of the forgotten grievers. because when a sibling dies, especially when the kids are young, you know, the focus often is on the parent. Is, oh my gosh, this must be horrible for your mom or your dad. Yes, absolutely. And the sibling or siblings that are left behind inadvertently end up um, um, not feeling like they're as valid of a griever. And they're going, oh, you know, it's feel so bad for your mom and your dad. Okay. And so I mentioned that. Loss of a grandparent, loss of a caregiver. But in loss of health, yeah, of illness. Now, you know, we have many people who are long haulers, is being referred to for people who have had COVID for a period of time and are developing more chronic illness and chronic pain, aging. I definitely cannot do the things that I used to be able to do. You know, infertility, you know, so these are just different types of losses. Okay? I also think about special needs families. With that example, I used to be a special ed teacher back in the early 80s, and with autistic and very psychotic kids. And we were not addressing the grief of the families, of their expectations and hopes and dreams for their kids and for their families. You know, look at people's loss of identity, you know, loss of a professional identity. And this can happen with people who are retiring, okay? Or we have, you know, millions of people who lost their jobs. And who are they? Think about relational identity of the person who is a husband or a wife and now is a, you know, has to check the box of widow or widower. And who are they? Financial identity, you know, physical identity, and gender identity. And so there are so many different types of losses that and changes that we go through that we don't often identify as having grieving experiences from some of these losses that are different for each person. I remember years ago, he said, you know, divorce. No, she said, yeah, she said her divorce was not, she was not grieving that. That was not a loss to her. In fact, the day that she officially got divorced was Freedom Day for her. Her loss was the day that she got married, because that is the day, it was an arranged marriage, and that is the day that her husband in the evening started beating the living crap out of her. So we got to always listen for how do they identify it? What losses do they identify? You know, loss of safety, loss of trust. Often when somebody talks about feeling really abandoned, I like to also give them the words of, so it sounds like, you know, you've had a lot of losses of safety and losses of trust, which I think kind of helps, I think, move them from the cognitive idea of the abandonment to more of an emotional words. A loss of safety, loss of trust, or loss of freedom, and loss of justice, independence, loss of the right for respect. You know, how about the examples of loss of home, you know, due to a disaster, or a kid ending up having to be in foster home, or having put a grandparent or parent or a loved one into a nursing home, and how much of a grieving experience that is for the person going into that home, but also for the person, for the family, for those people who have to make that decision too. You know, moving. So, so when I think about all the losses of the pandemic that, you know, has kind of showed up in your life or the life of your clients. And I'm gonna stop and say hi. And so, so I thought that I'd just stop and ask you guys what losses, you know, have been significant for you or for any of your clients. And you can read about in the chat, and you do or don't have to participate. But I just thought that I'd stop and invite you. And does this make sense? Oh yeah, the kindergartner's first day of school. I was just talking with actually one of our associates. Oh, school for kids. Yeah, one of my associates we were talking about doing a loss history with kids, and kids talking about the first day of kindergarten being a loss. Oh yeah, all the graduations. Yeah, all of the, you know, proms and loss of community. Yeah, and play dates. Wow, yeah, lots of sports. Oh, freedom of speech, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, big tech silenced. Attending regular gender conferences with my transgender people. Oh, I bet. Yeah, yeah. Funerals, yeah. You know, not being able to attend funerals, of those rituals looking so incredibly different. I like to use the word surreal instead of the word in denial, because, you know, this isn't how it's supposed to be. Monthly dinners with your girlfriends, yeah, time with girlfriends to fill your tank, absolutely. Lots of older parents being able to come visit. Gathering with relatives and elder relatives, yeah. I have to say, I miss hugging. Yeah, I'm a hugger. Yeah, I was looking, yeah, a few of you are like, yeah. Yeah. Although, here, wait a minute, let me see if I can find it. So when we go over to go visit a couple of friends of ours who have really sequestered themselves also, is the one time that I will hug them. I will go wrap myself in a sheet and say, okay, I think I'm huggable. So yeah, we do hugs that way. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. The lack of physical connection to people. Yeah, yeah. So have you noticed how many people have been getting pets in the last year? People go, oh, you know, we can hug our pets. Yeah, at restaurants and movies and concerts and just normal activities. Yeah. So I'll go back. And you got chickens. That's clever. And I hear that chickens are very sociable. Yeah. Okay. So there's oops. So I've got safety, health, control, celebrations, morning rituals, self-care, sociability. Somebody said, you know, just generally, you know, sociability, but being nice to each other. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So here's I broke symptoms down into, I think it was 7 different areas. And so cognitive, you know, how does it affect our, you know, people's brains and physical, emotional, spiritual, social, family, and work. So cognitively, we know about shock and numbness, which lasts for a different amount of time for different people. And really poor attention span, you know, having a really hard time concentrating, unable to find the right words, you know, feeling really easily distracted, having poor memory, you know, a diminished ability to retain information. And so I think it's so important to be able to help our clients realize, because I know when people come into our center, when I work with clinicians about their clients, is often our clients will come in and say, or will show up on our screen and say, I think there's something wrong with me. Okay? I don't even know how many times I've had people say that. There must be something wrong with me because everybody else seems to be okay and I'm a mess. I feel crazy. Okay? Because the world feels so different. I was talking with somebody this morning, her brother died 2 weeks ago. And she is talking about, just the world feels really surreal. Feels like, she's kind of frozen and everybody else is walking around in this world where, I will say, and kind of there's a part of you that wants to yell at them and say, hey, do you not understand that my brother's not on the planet anymore? Or, I lost my job, don't you know? Yeah. And so, it's very isolating. Look at there are so many physical symptoms of grief that show up. Exhaustion, I think, tends to be one of the most common. And I like to share that word with my clients. Is at some point I was like, so, pretty exhausting. I was like, oh my God, yeah. It's like, yeah, it takes up an enormous amount of energy. Okay? People, will have, appetite or weight changes. That they don't want to eat anything. And sometimes alternated with, I'm eating everything. Okay. People have been talking about this COVID-19 actually refers to the pounds that we put on. And so, muscle tension, easily startled, okay, shortness of breath, headaches, chest pain, gastrointestinal irritations, nausea, okay, immune system illnesses. If any of you ever read the book Zebras, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, it's by Robert Sapolsky. And actually he was at a CAMFT conference years ago. And for any of you who are old enough to remember the comic Gallagher. And so Robert Sapolsky is kind of like Gallagher on biology. So he's got a good wry sense of humor, but he talks about, there's so many different ways that stress, I refer to that as grief, shows up in our body. And it doesn't cause cancer. It won't cause cancer, but it will cause cancerous cells to grow exponentially. Okay? And fatigue, sleeping problems. Robert Niemeyer, who is a huge authority in the grief world, actually I will share with you, he is created the Center for Loss, the Institute for Loss. It's up in Portland, and just Google Robert Niemeyer. And he and a guy named Sam Lee had created a coronavirus anxiety scale last year. And it was 5 symptoms, and they were actually all physical. So I think one was nausea, another one was gastrointestinal, muscle tension, and one of them was paralysis. Now, it wasn't necessarily, coma-like paralysis, but often people who are grieving will feel like they are just frozen and that they are stuck. Okay? So I also want to talk about sleep problems, because I like to ask not just how much sleep are you getting, when are you getting to bed, when are you waking up, how long does it take you to get to sleep? But I also have been asking people over the last few years, where are you sleeping? Okay. But it's really interesting when you ask, where are they sleeping? And people will tell you sometimes that going back to the bed that they shared, especially when it's been a partner loss, can be really painful. And people are talking about falling asleep on the couch or the easy chair a lot more often. And, kind of saying, yeah, I do kind of stay up later. I don't really want to go to bed, because often people are avoiding it and all day long have been trying to keep busy, which really doesn't do the job. And we have a lot of busy grievers who's, go sleep at night and can't get to sleep for very long, okay? Because that's when all of those ruminating starts coming up, all the woulda, coulda, shouldas. Especially with partner loss, I'll ask them, what, if they're back to sleeping in their bed, I'll ask them, what side of the bed are you sleeping on? And they'll tell you, often people will say, what, I can only sleep on my partner's side, or I can't sleep on that side. Or I make sure that, I have her clothes and I've wrapped them, in a special plastic bag during the day, because I'm trying to remember, I'm trying to keep, how she smells. In fact, actually, when I was doing a training for therapists, a therapist had contacted me afterwards and said, oh my gosh, now that makes so much more sense, is that after his mom died, his dad would sleep on his mom's side of the bed, and that he would cover himself in some of his wife's clothing, because he just wanted to feel connected with her, wanted to feel and smell her near him. We know kids end up sleeping in parents' rooms more often when they're stressed, but when they're grieving, okay? I ask about nightmares or night terrors for not just kids and teenagers, but for adults. A common dream is, I was just talking to two people about this morning, is when the person's loved one who has died they have a dream that they've come back, and how distressed that they are and confused in that, that little split microsecond when they wake up and they get a little confused of, wait a minute, are they here or did they die? And that realization of, oh, they really are gone. People will also talk about feeling bad that maybe their loved one hasn't come to visit them yet, too. I've had people who have told me that, that my uncle visited them. Well, why did my uncle visit them? They didn't visit me. Okay. So insomnia, hypersomnia. Okay. So think about, also, how does it affect us emotionally? Well, fear tends to be one of the primary emotions of grief, not the only one, but fear, especially initially, of, holy smokes, how am I going to get through this? What am I going to do? How am I going to get my kids through this? Okay. And so that anxiety is not unusual for panic attacks, for people that have panic attacks, really scared. And also this yearning of just missing and yearning, feeling really lonely and abandoned. Feeling really vulnerable. Somebody was just asking me this morning, it's been 2 weeks since her brother died, and she said, I haven't left the house. And she said, I am showering. So I'm wearing pajamas, but I am showering. And the question, that usually accompanies that is there something wrong with me? It's like, no, you know what? And a lot of it is feeling vulnerable, feeling unsafe, and kind of like, what? I feel like I kind of need to stay in my cave right now. Okay. that feeling helpless and powerless. Okay? Sometimes, angry or enraged or irritable. Okay. Also feeling relieved, and this is something that that grievers won't talk about very easily, because sometimes they feel bad that they feel relieved. That sometimes that's where the guilt comes in, is I feel relieved. Okay. So sometimes I may just put it out there. Some people, especially if the loved was in an enormous amount of pain or suffering, and I may say, some people will talk about feeling relieved that their loved one isn't in pain anymore, but that doesn't negate the sadness, and the missing and the pain of their loss too. Feeling guilty. When people talk about feeling guilty, I will sometimes ask, what do you wish that you had done differently? Because the guilty isn't usually about that they did something with malicious intent to harm. The guilty is usually stuff that they wish that they could have been able to do. Okay? And it's not rational, as we know, grief isn't rational. Okay? Feeling numb, which we know means there's usually a whole bunch of feelings under that. Okay? I'm feeling sad. So, so this is a study that I found of, I'm talking about emotions also, of involuntary autobiographical memories, which is basically those memories that just pop up in your head. Okay, but of course, we're going to come up with a term for it, and they seem to come out of nowhere, and they tend to occur when we're engaging in routine activities. Okay, driving somewhere, eating, walking. Okay. And in this study, is that they usually occur 3 to 5 times a day, and up to about 3 times more than these voluntary memories that we consciously bring up. However, I have to say, from all my experiences, I think that when people are grieving the loss of someone, those involuntary autobiographical memories, they pop up far more frequently than just 3 to 5 times a day. Okay? Because there is an automatic review of the whole entire relationship that they are unconsciously having in their head. And it's not linear, and it's not even, it's not time, it's not presented in this neat time. It's a whole bunch of flashes. So I bring this up because I talk to people about what I call grief tsunamis. Okay? And that there are triggers, things that will trigger our grief. And often they can feel like a tsunami, meaning that they kind of come out of nowhere and are very overwhelming very quickly. Okay? They can be activated, if I think about it in terms of your senses. Think about it of, okay, what are they hearing? Okay? An ambulance, the sound of an ambulance siren may have a very, very different meaning for a griever whose loved one didn't, died before the ambulance got here, or that their loved one was taken away by the ambulance. Okay. Smells, a smell of a particular perfume, a food. So smell and taste comes up a lot with food, which then also gets activated by holidays coming up too. Touching things, of physically going through loved ones' things, and can be change in seasons, because I was thinking of, just the feel of the breeze at a particular time of the year may consciously or unconsciously trigger memories and emotions that will come up. Sight, going through photos. Facebook is really, is really good at all of those. Oh, here, remember this 3 years ago. Okay. And I've had several grievers will be like, ah, that whole thing popped up, on my feed this morning. It totally threw me off. And so we can talk to our clients about, about their triggers and about what are some upcoming days ahead that may have more difficulty than other days. Doesn't mean that and sometimes they're traditional, but sometimes it's just for somebody, they told me when the time changed in the fall was a huge trigger for him. It took him years to realize that. Okay, so then I think about the spirit. How does it affect people spiritually? Okay? Is it spirituality being an incredible great source of comfort? However, also when a person is facing a lot of physical and emotional pain and other challenges, that they may experience a lot of spiritual distress. Is that this isn't how it was supposed to be, okay? Is not being able to find meaning or comfort or connection, or what seemed important before doesn't seem very important. Or somebody who's been told, well, or who feels guilty of, I didn't pray hard enough. Okay. I heard one woman had told me that her husband had died had a heart attack in the middle of service at church. This was years ago. And when she went back to the church at some point, she had her kids with her. She said she remembers that somebody that was right behind her, maybe 1 or 2 pews away, she said she could hear them making comments and taking bets on how long it was going to be until she got remarried. So spirituality also is people being able to find meaning, and finding meaning. If you look at Robert Niemeyer's work, he has devoted the last 20 years, at least of his career, of creating theory about grievers being able to find meaning. Look at Viktor Frankl's book of Man's Search for Meaning, who I'm not related to. It'd be really cool if I was. So look at social. So I look at the area of social of the grievers are very hypersensitive, and they're very hyper aware to their loss. And so for somebody who has just had a baby die, okay, or a pregnancy loss, they will say that they have seen every pregnant person that there is in the whole entire earth, and they're sure has come into their viewpoint in the last week or day or whatever, okay, because we're hypersensitive to that. Another sign that this is actually, I took this from Jody Messina, wrote a song years ago called "My Give a Damn's Busted," and so I tell people, you may find that your give a damn is broken, okay, that what seemed important before, you really don't care about now. Okay? Also feeling dependent on others and feeling icky about that, or having reactions that are way over the top, and or feeling withdrawn and isolative, noticing that other people may be avoiding you. This is kind of hard with COVID, okay, because people are avoiding each other anyway, or that they may be a bit snappy with the people around them, and that their frustration tolerance is really low, and that they're really easily agitated. With families, often I see this really initial closeness, which can happen for a short period of time of let's bygones be bygones, and who and what is really important, and we know family and friends are most important. And there can also be this hypervigilance about the remaining loved one's safety and health, especially if if a loved one has died from an illness like coronavirus, of any, there's a hypersensitivity to, are you okay, you sure? Okay. But there's also a gradual distancing from each other, and it's actually with good intention if we think about it, is because a lot of times the people are and families are trying to protect each other. You know what, I don't want mom to see that I'm crying, or if I can't stand when dad starts talking about John and I can't hear it. Okay. There's also all the differences in how each member in the family reacts to the loss, and that can cause a lot of misunderstandings. Oh, the person that cries the most, oh, well, they must be grieving more than somebody else who's not. It's like, no, it's different. Okay. And that each person had a unique relationship with the person who's not there. And that can cause a lot of divided loyalties. I'm actually speaking really quickly because I have a lot more slides for you. And work, I see kind of similar, dynamics. And this is my handy dandy little symptom sheet. And Allie, I can't remember if I sent a copy of that to you or not. Okay, if I didn't, then I'll send you a copy too. Okay. So I wanted to just include this small piece about trauma, and that, what gets defined as trauma is different for each person. Okay. And that is such a broad range of experiences. But we know that it is more likely to have a negative impact on somebody if the event was something unexpected, or that they weren't prepared for, or that they feel like they didn't have any control over. And so those traumatic events marked by that helplessness, sense of horror, serious injury, threat of serious injury or death, can be a one-time event or a chronic ongoing. And there's a lot of talk about how traumatic that the effect of living in this pandemic has been. So higher prevalence, these factors there's a higher prevalence of what we call complicated grief. And I will tell you, look up the Center for Complicated Grief. It's in New York, Columbia, and it's headed by Dr. Catherine Shear. And I love her stuff. So we look at, if we look at the factors that increase somebody's complicated grief, and we really also think that these circumstances over the last year, we were going to see a significant increase in complicated grief cases. But sudden unexpected deaths, death of a child, loss of a, I'll say, codependent, enmeshed, highly ambivalent, but also a very close relationship with somebody that that the person really depended a lot on. Okay, can also higher prevalence of complicated grief if the person has a mood disorder or separation anxiety, PTSD, personality disorder, history of abuse or trauma, or a significant other losses. And that's what's complicated, is that there's been so many multiple losses in a very close duration of time. And so when I look at the difference between grief and trauma, we're going to see more terror, okay, flashbacks, and avoidance about talking about the event at all. And that guilt turns into more, it's my fault. Okay, so I'm going fast because I have a lot. With complicated grief, you're going to look at, okay, what needs to be, stabilized first. Okay. So here's my thing on theories. Okay, rent your theories, don't buy them. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is the most well-known. The stages of dying, by the way, in her initial book, which was based on her thesis on death and dying, the word grief wasn't even in there. Okay? And those stages were really developed from the interviews that she did from people who were terminally ill. And it was back in the 70s, and then it got translated as stages of grief because it was like, oh, people glommed onto that. Okay? And Elizabeth Kubler-Ross had said, really is no typical response to loss, and there's no typical loss, and grief is really individual, and nobody goes through all of them and not in a prescribed order. So I say this because it's very confusing. Stages are misleading, and they can be confusing, and they can be damaging because grievers start doubting a lot of that is also, there must be something wrong with me because, I don't know, people tell me, I'm in denial, okay? When I think about the word denial, I tend not to use the word denial, okay, unless we're talking, about somebody with addiction, okay? But denial, using the word denial, I think sets up an internal resistance and a judgment. So, because I know if somebody says, oh, you're just in denial, I'm going, no, I'm not, okay? And so it's a different process. So I tend to use the word surreal instead. I use the word surreal a lot, okay? Because it feels weird. Actually, weird is also another word I've used a lot in the last year, in particular, okay? Disbelief, shock, okay? So if you look at the stages of anger and depression, they're not a stage, they're feelings, okay? When you look at bargaining, well, we can't bargain the loved one back, but that gets justified of, oh, well, that's all the if only and woulda, coulda, shouldas, okay? And then the stage of acceptance, what does that mean anyway? And think about, but I had somebody last year, her companion dog had died, and she was absolutely beyond distraught. And she was like, I am never going to accept it. I said, well, it's not acceptable. And so I tend not to use the word acceptance, okay? I will say, if you go to whatsyourgrief.com, it's created by Eleanor Haley and Litza Williams, 2 social workers out in Maryland. They have awesome articles on their website. They have hundreds of articles, and they're good writers, but they've got a whole piece on theories as well. William Worden does tasks of grief. First one is accepting the reality of the loss. That's that surrealness. We'll say sudden loss that's perceived as preventable absolutely is a complication of this task. Okay. Second task, and it's not in order also. Another task is working through the pain of grief. A lot of that I think is about unfinished business, working through all the emotions. And I know I'm totally not explaining this in a whole lot of depth because I'm trying to pay attention and be respectful of your time. Third task is adjusting to an environment in which the deceased is missing. And that's learning new roles and new skills. Somebody was telling me this morning, her wife had died a couple of months ago, and she's moved, and she was talking about this whole all-day project of just putting shelves up on the wall. And we were talking about, she was like, she would have been so proud of me because she was the one who did all of that. And those new skills. Okay? And then another task of finding an enduring connection. We can also refer to that as continuing bonds. Okay, that it used to be Freud actually would talk about, you just have to put that relationship away and move on. And it's, you can bring them with you, okay, while embarking on a new life. So I wanted to share this. I'm almost done. So I wanted to share this slide with you, which I love this this model, which is the dual process model of coping and bereavement. And this I love because it's oscillating. So it goes back and forth between loss oriented, those thoughts and feelings and actions and, memories that bring up grief and, focusing on the loss. Also those kind of grief, what I call grief tsunami triggers, okay? That grief work or the intrusion of grief. And oscillating and kind of going back and forth between that and what's called restoration oriented, which is that, attending to life changes or doing new things, or just purposely distracting oneself from the grief. Because we can't be in one or the other all the time anyway. Okay? So I really like the dual process model actually is probably the one model that works for many different people and in different from different orientations. I will share with you, this is actually my model, which is what I listen for is I'm always listening for regrets, resentments, and remembrances, because I couldn't find another R word for like positive good stuff. Okay. So I refer to it as the 3 R's of the pain of grief, which is often about unfinished business. And unfinished business can be about the unfinished business of we had all of this future of the relationship and those hopes and dreams and expectations that we didn't get, that we got robbed of. And so when I'm listening for regrets, I'm listening for the things that our clients, that they wish that they could have done different, okay, or should have done, or should have not said, okay, or the missed opportunities that they passed by or didn't realize until too late. We hear it often as guilt. Okay? When I'm listening for resentments, it's those things that they were annoyed by or disappointed or angry with their loved one. I realized that that I did this. This is actually a piece of that I was applying to for us as clinicians. This is something that I do when I've had a client terminate, and it's a ritual of, okay, how do I take care of myself? Okay, I gotta look at what's the stuff that I wish that I had done differently as a therapist. What's the resentments? What was I annoyed by or disappointed? Okay. And then the third category is remembrances, is the good stuff in the relationship and the appreciations of gratitude. And then actually I usually put it all together and write something out. And that's kind of how I ground myself. But this is what I'm listening for with my clients, as and I may not always do something about it right away, but I'm listening for those pieces that are unfinished. And I want to share this before I end. Is I found this online on Facebook somewhere, and I really love this part. Is what about the sense of not wanting to move through the process of feeling the need and inevitability to stay in the grief, because that's all that's left. Or I'm going to say that's all we think that's left. Okay. Is there some theory or part of a theory that addresses this? I'm not in denial. I love this person said that. I'm not in denial of what happened. And even then, there's this doubt most of the time, I think. But anytime I get a sense of feeling okay, I immediately want to return to not feeling okay, because the okayness is too unsettling, because I can at least bend my mind around not feeling okay. Because the okayness often gets equated with feeling disloyal, or that I've left them behind. Okay? And I will say that I usually will talk to clients, we'll talk about 3 types of relationship. Okay, is that there's the physical relationship, which is the one that often has ended, okay, or changed. It can be a divorce, but that the physical relationship has ended, but that the relationship that they have with that person emotionally that they always get to be able to have that person in their heart. And for some people, there's a third relationship, which is the spiritual relationship. And I think I see my job in doing grief work of helping people say goodbye to the end of the physical, and also being able to strengthen the tethers of the relationship, the emotional relationship, and or the tethers of the spiritual relationship. So we talked about I talked about a whole lot of stuff. And my suggestion is, I think psychoeducation about symptoms and signs really helps a lot. Okay. I ask about people's loss, their history of their loss, okay, of their losses. That's one of the things that I do. I like educating people about grief tsunamis, okay, and planning for upcoming significant dates. And I also urge you to get additional training in this area, because holy smokes, we have more and more people that have had all different types of losses. And I'll also say that people are beginning to be much more aware of the impact of grief too. So expect good moments and bad moments. I like to say good moments. People go, oh, well, it's a good day or a bad day. It's like, you know what, how about we just, break that down into a moment, okay? Eat well and get lots of exercise. Of course, I myself have not been doing that. Not eating well and not getting enough exercise myself. I will totally fess up to that. Give yourself extra time for rest and sleep. I understand that you may be easily overwhelmed, and go give yourself timeouts. Okay. So I leave you with this is, and this is something that I share with my clients at the end of the first session. I will always say, you know what, I'm going to hold the hope for you, because I've been doing this for a long time. And here's what's really cool is that I get to see people get their feet back on the ground. And so you don't have to have any hope at all. In fact, I really hear that, why would you, feel really hopeful? It's really a shitty thing of why it is that you had to come and see us. But I'm going to hold the hope for you. And what's really interesting is, I had, after I've been saying that for a while, I will have clients later on that will come back and say, when you said that you were going to hold the hope, that was actually really important. That really helped a lot. And it's kind of paradoxical, because I'm not saying, oh, be hopeful. It's like, why would you be hopeful? Okay, your whole entire world just blew up. And so I'm going to hold the hope for you. So I'm going to hold hope for you, and because I love doing this work, and I love being able to support clinicians and being able to feel more confident in doing that work. So I'm going to stop the share, and I say hi. And do you have any questions? And did it make sense? And pop on if you want.
Debbie, I will just say, as you're speaking, there was lots of different comments, just speaking to the validation of the things that you were saying that really resonated with people. People saying the quote that you made, the quote that you gave a couple different times just really resonated, or how you changed that label from acceptance to just shifting those labels and talking about that. It really resonated with a lot of people who were chiming in to acknowledge that. So I just definitely thought that was meaningful.
Yeah, I really think that how we language grief is really important. I'm like, I really pay attention to people's language. I don't want to call myself a language police, but I really kind of back that up and go, oh, hold on, wait. Let me, what do you mean by that? Tell me more about that part, or be able to, I think, to be able to help give them words that aren't shaming. Yeah. Any questions, comments, preoccupation?
I had a question for you, actually two. One of them was about the automatic memories and
Mhm.
and sort of, I was just thinking, I do a lot of work on intrusive thoughts or scary thoughts. I work with postpartum moms a lot that are
Okay.
having those.
Mhm.
So, but that, it's different, right? Because those are
Mhm.
sometimes like ego dystonic or unwanted or unpleasant. But if they're memories, then I would imagine a lot of times they're not unwanted. They might just be overwhelming, right? So I was just curious
Yeah.
about the difference in
Oh, you're
treating
right.
them.
You're right. Is that is different. Is that these are the memories that pop up that are often triggered by sometimes a smell or a sound or just another memory that has come up, and and then it's what do I deal with, how do I deal with that, and it brings up a story, and then the person feels isolated because then when they go to tell the story, they get what I refer to as the thud. It's a thud effect. They talk about the person that isn't around, and there's this very loud silence, this like thud. Oh, we don't talk about that. We don't go there. Yeah. Here's a question I forgot to put in. Here's a question that I like to ask, especially in the first session. There's a whole bunch of questions that I ask, but one of them is, what has been, in regards to your grief, what's been helpful of what people around you have said, and what's been unhelpful? Now, I will tell you, it's kind of a sneaky question, but I'm not above being sneaky when it comes to group work. Is because most people initially will say, oh no, everybody's been wonderful. And I say, oh, well, you are really lucky, because like 85% of what grievers hear, we've done different studies, is basically move on, get over it, tomorrow's another day. And so, I'm glad that that everybody's been supportive. And that's when people go, well, and then they start getting a little more honest, okay, about, actually some of the things that people have said, I know that that what they meant well. And I'll say, absolutely. And I really try to qualify that initially. I'd say, I know there are so many people who mean well, and yet the problem is that what they say can tend to be very isolating or minimizing. And often they don't even mean it that way. Okay? There's a website that was created years ago, widownet.org. And it's by a guy named, I think, Paul Goshen. I think he created it like in the mid to late 90s. His wife had died. And so he started collecting comments from people trying to be helpful. Now, I love the list. The name of the list is God, I haven't printed out in a really long time. Dumb questions and stupid remarks. There might be stupid questions and dumb remarks, otherwise known as public education for the terminally tactless. It is, every time I print it out, is 12 pages if you print it out. And it's not only related to spouse or partner loss, of comments that people have said that some of them were like, oh, wow, this is like pretty horrendous. Okay. Now I talk about that. I don't give that list out, but I talk about that because it can be really validating. The father of a 6-year-old who had died from a head injury had fallen. And he had come in and we had been doing a lot of work. And he came in one day, oh man, he was just pissy about something. I was like, oh my gosh, what happened? And he said, oh, it's a good thing I was on my way over here today. And he said that he had stopped at the gas station. He was filling up, and he recognized the person that was next to him filling up her gas. She had been one of the med techs the day that his daughter had fallen, and subsequently very quickly had died. And she recognized him, and they had a few words. And then she was referring to, she had just gotten back from the hospital. There was another child who had a similar fall, but he had been in a coma. They had taken him off of life support, and he was still lingering. And she said, well, you know, at least your daughter died. And that man, that man came in, and he was like, after he told me, he goes, what part of that did she think was going to be helpful? Yeah. And so I'm really glad, because we had already had that conversation, because I'm not sure that he would have interpreted that differently had that not been validated of, you know, and you know, and I really try to respect of, you know, often these are from people that they just don't know what to say. It would be so much better if they just said, I have no earthly idea what to say, but they don't, right? Because they're trying to be helpful. Yeah. Yeah. But it was, you know, he was like, I'm so glad we had talked about this before, because, and then he had said, I was really glad I was over here, so that he'd come in and be able to share that. So, yeah. Any other questions, comments, preoccupations? Okay. I will tell you, if you go over to my website, I've got a new training coming up next week. It's on Monday from 4:30 to 6. It's a 4-part series, and so there's information there that you can go. Okay. Thank you very, very much for letting me come and hang out with you guys.
Thank you, Debbie, so much. We really appreciate having you here. Go ahead, Ellie.
I was just saying thank you again. And could you just say it's your on your website is where you can get the link for that training that you?
Yeah, so we're at the website, privatepracticegrief.com. Oh, and you know what? I have a whole Facebook group just for clinicians. If you want to learn anything more about grief, let's see. We have, oh my gosh, we have almost 2,000 clinicians from actually all over the world. We get people from South Africa, people all over, and people are so wonderfully generous. One of my things that I really advocate for is, you know, there's so many different ways of being able to help grievers. There's not like just one way, okay? And so there's a lot of people on there. People say, oh, I'm thinking about, or I want to share this, or I'm having a hard time. And yeah, it's a good community. So, okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Debbie.
Debbie, that was wonderful. Okay. That was so rich and so broad, and you crammed it all in. It was just, I see why you invited her. Hooray. Thank you. What a gift.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you.
Nice to see.
Okay. And I will say too, we're gonna get the PowerPoint presentation, and you know what, I think what I'll do, if everyone fills out the course evaluation here, I'm gonna put the link again right at the bottom of the chat. If you fill out that course evaluation, you're gonna get an emailed certificate, and I'll probably just go ahead and email you the PowerPoint from tonight also, because I know I want to see a few of those last screens on the different, you know, your 3 R's and the other treatment screens. So we'll get the PowerPoint. Go ahead.
I'll make sure that PowerPoint right now, I'll flip that script, that my 3 R's to include for clients as well.
Oh, awesome.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
So much.
Okay. Have a good evening.
I have a